Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual session of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. I'm Sam Gill, Senior Vice President and Chief Program Officer at the Jonas and James L. Knight Foundation. The Knight Commission was founded by the Knight Foundation in 1989 to promote and lead transformational change that prioritizes the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. The modern Knight Foundation is focused on supporting a stronger democracy through more informed and engaged communities. And the Knight Commission plays an essential role in providing both information and a critical source of engagement around the future of college athletics, the role of collegiate athletics in the educational enterprise of American higher ed, and the role of collegiate athletics in society at large. We can imagine few moments in which those three factors are coming together as acutely as they are in the present. And today's session joins two sessions held last month in raising essential questions about the present and future of collegiate athletics in the United States. The commission is led by co-chairs Carol Cartwright and Arnie Duncan and includes 20 other leaders who volunteer to serve on this independent commission to provide thought leadership about the future of college sports. Today's session will feature commentary from three of the commission's members, Nancy Zimpher, Kendall Spencer, and Shanteona Keys. Nancy chairs the commission's College Sports Governance and Structure Committee and will lead today's session.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Sam. Last December, the Knight Commission launched a major examination of the Division I model, citing the challenges created by the highly commercialized environment for football bowl subdivision FBS football and some NCAA Division I sports, particularly men's basketball. The issues we cited at that time have only become more pronounced this year, given the significant impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In conducting our examination, our group commissioned several reports and draws on the vast and diverse experience of our commission membership. Our commission includes individuals with expertise across all college athletics and higher education. Among the titles of our members and that they have held or still hold include University President and Chancellor, Athletics Director, Faculty Athletics Representative, College Athlete, Board of Trustee Member and Chair, Head Coach, and University General Counsel. We understand the value of these broad perspectives, and we knew that our own views would be better informed with surveying current D1 leaders about their views on governance and the structure of D1. Today's session, the third in our Transforming the D1 Model series, will release the results of the survey we commissioned. In sessions 1 and 2, we covered important issues related to D1 finances and revenue distribution that our commission studied. Today's session is another important component of our year-long examination that will culminate in recommendations to be announced on November 19th. So before I turn this over to our presenters, I want to remind you, if you have a question, please click on the Q&A icon on your control panel. We will answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Please identify your name and affiliation with your question. And today's session is being recorded and will be posted on our website. The survey was conducted in conjunction with Shugol Research, and we want to express our appreciation for their work. In today's presentation, Mark Shugol will provide a brief overview of the methodology and response rates, and then Knight Commission consultant Michael Cross will present the top-line findings. Commission member Kendall Spencer will highlight key research takeaways. The entire research report is posted on the Knight Commission website. We will now hear the results of this important and timely survey on the NCAA D1 governance and organizational structure. So now I will turn it over to Mark Shugol.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Nancy, for the introduction. I get to tell you a little bit about the study methodology. I know that's not everyone's favorite part of this sort of presentation, but it's so important because it represents a roadmap to the findings that we achieved here. So let me tell you something about that study methodology. We began it back in April and conducted 4 focus groups with athletic directors and commissioners across Division I. Focus groups are an open-ended conversational methodology and allows us to hear things that can drive the online survey that we then built. We built this 15-minute online survey and emailed it to D1 campus leaders using lists provided by the NCAA and the Knight Commission. Data collection ran from June 18th to July 14th. These dates are important because, of course, this was after 2020 Winter Championships, including basketball, were canceled, spring sports were canceled, but it was before any decisions were made about fall sports, including football. We surveyed various campus leaders, and they are shown on this chart along with their response rates. The survey was sent to leaders involved in campus, conference, and national athletics governance. These are presidents, athletic directors, faculty athletics representatives, senior women administrators, conference commissioners, and college athletes on the NCAA's National Student Athlete Advisory Board. The survey achieved a strong response rate for people of this level, especially during the height of the pandemic, when many important decisions were being made by these leaders, dealing with athletics, dealing with opening campuses, whether classes would be in person or not. There was a lot going on, and we got great response rates from these people participating in the study. In total, there were 362 responses. That gives you data that's accurate within plus or minus 5% at a 95% confidence level. We had a response rate, as you can see, of at least 20% for each position category, except for the senior women administrator position, which was slightly lower at 19%. Conference commissioners responded at the highest response rate at 66%, and this is important because there are so few of them given the number of conferences in Division I. So that led to 32 responses from this group. Among the campus leaders groups, the 351 schools surveyed, athletics directors achieved the highest response rate of 30%. And I tell you, we break down these groups and I tell you the response rates because in addition to evaluating results of the total sample, this report will also compare the views of some of these subgroups. We will break them out and look how they're different. One subgroup we look at is key decision makers. These positions include presidents, athletic directors, and commissioners. While the presentation that follows will not reveal this level of detail, analyses for these positions are broken out in the full report that you will soon have access to. Other key subgroups that we analyzed are the 4 competitive classification groups, the Autonomy 5 or A5 plus Notre Dame, the Group of 5 or G5 plus Independence, the Football Championship Subdivision, FCS, and D1 schools with no football. In analyzing these subgroups, the subgroup sizes sometimes become small. While they are sometimes too small to have a minimal statistical margin of error, they are large enough to identify general differences or similarities between these groups. Therefore, we can compare results of A5 versus G5 versus FCS and D1, and we can compare results between presidents, ADs, and commissioners. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any additional questions on the methodology later in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for the great overview. The full report on which we're basing this summary is over 180 pages, and I want to assure you we will definitely not cover all of it. In about 20 minutes, you will have a very clear understanding of what the leaders in college athletics think based on the top line findings. When we started this research, our focus on D1 governance and structure had 2 primary goals. First, we wanted to learn from campus and conference leaders about what they viewed as the common problems in Division I athletics to see if there is a case for change. Second, we wanted to test the openness of those leaders to a variety of policy reforms and major organizational restructuring that might be able to address these problems. This groundbreaking survey found deep and far-ranging dissatisfaction with the state of Division I governance, with the vast majority of NCAA Division I leaders believing college sports reform should be focused on big solutions. After we lay out the case for change, we will share with you what those big solutions could be and reactions towards them. So, what is the case for change within college athletics? We identified 4 areas of agreement about the problems that are driving a desire for change. Favorable attitudes towards change itself, an absence of common values across all of Division I, concerns about the governance of college athletics, and the broken finances of college athletics. So let's start with attitudes towards change regarding governance and organizational reform, when it should occur, and its magnitude. These results are among the strongest in our research and set the stage for the actual reforms we tested. The first bar on the left shows strong support from 74% of all respondents for governance reform. So that we're clear about what governance means, simply put, it is the process by which decisions are made within Division I of the NCAA. Using this first graphic, I want to take a moment to orient you to the way we will present the information throughout the presentation. The line running horizontally through the middle of the page represents the dividing line regarding the percentage of respondents who have favorable or unfavorable views about the questions asked. Solid bars above the line indicate agreement, satisfaction, or willingness to support the referenced topic. Striped bars below the line indicate the opposite. The percentages in many cases will total to less than 100% since these graphics do not display responses that are neutral. Returning to the data, the second bar shows nearly 3 in 4 respondents agree they would like to see reform to the organizational and competitive structures of Division I. We define organizational and competitive structures as things that directly impact competition and the athlete's experiences. Support for specific competitive and organizational reform varies depending on the concept. When should change occur? A lot of respondents said right now, with more than 7 in 10 indicating the ongoing pandemic and its associated financial challenges present the perfect time to tackle problems in governance and organizational structure. And in what may be the most important finding on this page, respondents indicate they don't want reform to dabble around the edges. Nearly 80% believe that Division I reform should look for big solutions. Clearly, there is a strong desire to see significant macro-level changes in governance sooner rather than later. The absence of common values about what Division I athletics should be at an educational institution is the second driver of change. As you can see on the left, respondents don't believe the problems of college athletics are caused by their own campuses. In fact, 84% of respondents believe their own athletics program is in alignment with the core mission of their institution. But institutional alignment doesn't translate to alignment between schools. The bar on the right shows, in fact, only 1/3 of respondents agree that Division I schools have common values about what intercollegiate athletics should be at an educational institution. This view is not surprising across 351 colleges and universities with disparate missions and finances. But the survey does in fact reveal agreement with regard to the treatment of college athletes, that they should be students and their health and safety should be a priority. Across the board, there is overwhelming sentiment that athletes in the revenue sports of football and basketball be treated similarly to other sports regarding academic eligibility, amateurism, and long-term health coverage. And there is strong support for adding protections for college athletes. Nearly 80% of respondents believe some members of the NCAA governing board should be selected to explicitly represent the health, safety, and well-being of college athletes. Notably, these responses were expressed before the splinter decision-making in August that led some FBS conferences to cancel their fall football seasons in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, while others decided to play with differing protocols. So we've talked about the orientation toward change and the absence of common values. Let's get into the third rationale for change, dissatisfaction with the governance of Division I. Simply put, satisfaction with NCAA governance is low. Fewer than 1/3 of respondents are satisfied with the current structure, and 4 in 10 express outright dissatisfaction. This is the first time we're showing you breakdowns by competitive classification. To properly orient you, the blue bar on the left shows the Autonomy 5. The green bar shows the Group of 5, and these two bars make up the Football Bowl Subdivision FBS institutions. The yellow bar represents respondents from the Football Championship Subdivision, FCS, and the red are Division I no football respondents. As you can see, low satisfaction is consistent across the respondents from all four competitive classifications. Ironically, outright dissatisfaction is greatest with the Autonomy 5 respondents, despite a weighted voting model that gives them significantly greater power in the NCAA structure, with nearly 50% indicating dissatisfaction. Although not shown here, dissatisfaction among the leaders of college athletics, presidents, ADs, and commissioners is deep, with presidential satisfaction barely topping 20%. Weighted voting power and representation that favors FBS institutions creates a massive divide by competitive classification about the appropriateness of the current governance arrangement. As you can see on the left, the Autonomy 5 believes their elevated status within Division I is appropriate. The Group of 5 conferences find weighted voting less appropriate than the Autonomy 5, but their criticism is muted since their institutions and conferences also benefit from weighted voting. The FCS and Division I no football, who make up nearly 2/3 of the Division I schools, yet have less than half of the voting power, are clearly dissatisfied with the appropriateness of weighted voting and governance. And dissatisfaction with governance goes beyond weighted voting. More than 60% of respondents, including nearly 3/4 of ADs, indicated conference commissioners have more influence over NCAA governance than presidents. This finding, coupled with weighted voting for FBS schools, suggests that many respondents feel their institution is disenfranchised by the NCAA's governance structure. The NCAA's current structure as a membership organization requires significant collaboration and coordination of its bureaucracy of boards, committees, and stakeholder groups, which can impede progress. The survey measures the desire to have greater centralized leadership in the sports of FBS football and men's basketball. Slightly more than half of the FBS respondents support a single point of leadership similar to a commissioner for FBS football. And a similar percentage of respondents across all institutional types support the same concept for Division I basketball. Let's move to the fourth rationale for change that our research found: a broken financial model in Division I athletics. The survey explored a number of financial issues to gain insight about the vastly disparate athletic budgets across Division I, which range from $4 million to more than $220 million. The financial items we will highlight include significant resource differences, concerns regarding spending and funding sources, dissatisfaction with NCAA and college football playoff revenue distribution, and potential solutions for healthier finances. With respect to resource differences, as you can see here, more than 3/4 of the respondents agree there is too much resource difference across institutions in Division I. Agreement that significant differences exist is shared across all competitive categories, as well as by presidents, ADs, and commissioners. Resource differences can contribute to overspending on the sports that command the most attention: FBS football and men's basketball. In response to the statement, quote, "We spend more than we should to keep up with higher resource schools," as you can see on the left, 59% of FBS football respondents agree with this statement regarding their football programs. 53% of all respondents across all institutional types agree with this statement regarding their men's basketball programs. The graphic on the right shows that overspending in all other sports to keep up with competitors is less concerning. When there are concerns about overspending, questions about funding sources can be expected. These concerns are exacerbated when institutions face significant financial pressure. This graphic indicates the respondents' concern about athletics funding sources. Note the difference in perceptions about funding sources between the Autonomy 5 shown on the left And the 3 bars to the right, which show more than half of the respondents from the group of 5 FCS and Division I no football institutions believe there is too much reliance on university funding and student fees. It is notable that agreement about over-reliance on institutional funds and student fees is strongest among FBS institutions in the group of 5. Because of these pressures, colleges will of course seek alternative ways to fund their budgets. One important funding source is revenue distribution from the NCAA and college football playoff. In session 2, we reviewed in detail revenue distributions from the NCAA, as well as the separate and independent CFP. Collectively, they send more than $1 billion to Division I institutions annually. However, there are significant differences in how much revenue each school receives that are heavily weighted in favor of the FBS institutions who comprise the CFP. You can access video and materials explaining these distributions in detail on our website. How these funds are distributed and managed provides some of the greatest dissatisfaction in our research. Regarding the NCAA's revenue distribution, barely 1 in 5 of all respondents are satisfied with the formula. Regarding the CFP revenue distribution, only 25% of all respondents are satisfied with this distribution model. Looking at the responses by competitive classification reveals that only the A5 respondents have high levels of satisfaction with these revenue distribution models. 2 weeks ago, the Knight Commission recommended a major change to NCAA revenue distribution. The change would remove FBS football from the calculation because the NCAA doesn't sponsor the sport's national championship, which is an NCAA criterion for counting in the distribution formula. The survey results show strong support for removing FBS football from the formula, with only 22% of respondents finding it appropriate that FBS football scholarships and other factors count towards NCAA revenue distribution. In addition, the sport of FBS football negatively impacts the finances of the NCAA and non-FBS institutions because the NCAA receives no revenue from the sport but absorbs expenses related to its national operating costs. Let's pause here for a moment, catch our breath because we've covered a lot, and review what we've seen. There are strong attitudes towards change and reform. There is consensus that Division I lacks common values across institutions. There is low satisfaction with governance, and the finances of college athletics are broken, all of which create a compelling case for change. We are now more than halfway through the data. We're going to spend about 10 minutes looking at potential solutions examined by the survey. As you've heard, there is a desire for big solutions, major reform opportunities that are external to the NCAA, and reforms that are within control of Division I institutions do in fact exist. Big external and internal reform falls into 4 categories. External reform on the top left would require federal legislation or collective action within conferences. Internal reforms are within the NCAA membership's control. These include policy changes, adjustments to current competitive arrangements, and major reorganization of the Division I structure. Let's start with 2 major solutions outside the NCAA's control. As you saw earlier in the presentation, reducing spending and lessening the athletics' impact on campus budgets and student fees were of significant concern. The data show meaningful support for seeking an antitrust exemption to reduce athletics costs, which is supported by 67% of all respondents. This solution is extremely popular with the Autonomy 5 respondents, with 81% willing to pursue such an exemption, among the highest levels of Autonomy 5 support in the survey. Conference-level agreements for capping institutional operating budgets, including coaching salaries and sport-specific personnel, are nearly as popular and supported by 62% of respondents, which you can see on the right, and could also be impacted by antitrust protections. It is particularly notable that 3 out of 4 presidents support both approaches to reducing athletic spending. But it is easier and preferable to solve your own problems than having someone do it for you. So let's examine reforms that are within the NCAA's control, starting with policies that impact the competitive and organizational structure and affect the college athlete experience. Opportunities for policy change include NCAA enforcement, with less than 1/4 of respondents agreeing that the current system works well. Financial aid allocations, less than half indicate the current maximum scholarship allocations and their designation as headcount or equivalency are appropriate, suggesting this is an area in need of review. And season length. Half the respondents think men's and women's basketball seasons are too long, with a slightly smaller percentage indicating sports seasons in general are too long. Changes to these areas would be beneficial, but policy changes will fall short of the big solutions respondents are seeking. So let's expand our view of reform and look at alternative models within the current competitive structure reviewed in the survey. Division I membership has 351 schools with vast differences in institutional characteristics, including their missions, financial structures, funding sources, and student body enrollment. Across these distinct and unique schools, it is fair to say that March Madness is the glue that holds the Division I organizational structure together, because basketball is the only sport that every Division I school fields, and the revenue generated by the NCAA tournament and the Final Four is so significant. As you can see here, 77% of all respondents believe keeping March Madness in its current form is essential and should be maintained. Any macro level change will need to account for this strong sentiment. A key component for a conference to achieve automatic qualification into the NCAA basketball tournament is that the conference must be a multi-sport conference. Several questions tested the strength of the multi-sport conference arrangement. Nearly 8 in 10 respondents, as seen on the left, believe keeping their institution's team in the same multi-sport conference is important, if possible. But they indicate the conferences we see today work in many, but not all situations. When looking at the data by competitive classification, it is notable the group of 5 respondents, shown here in green, view having all sports in a multi-sport conference less favorably than the other classifications. These conferences have broader geographic footprints, and as such, a significantly lower percentage of G5 respondents agree that their current conference is a good fit with respect to travel and rivalries. Many respondents are likely aware of situations, either at their own institution or at other schools, where geography presents travel challenges, or specific sports would benefit from having league competition outside their multi-sport conference. The data shows 62% of respondents support permitting sports to form geographic federations in sports other than basketball outside their multi-sport conferences. And more than half support allowing single sport Division I programs for sports with reduced numbers, similar to what currently occurs in lacrosse and hockey, which could help strengthen the number of teams and sports with limited Division I sponsorship. Further, in sports other than basketball, respondents are willing to consider reducing the influence of strength of schedule in the criteria for NCAA championship selection and seeding, which could lessen competitive pressures, encourage regional rivalries, and decrease travel time and expenses. Each of these potential solutions can be addressed and achieved within the current structure of Division I. To this point, we've seen the reaction to big solutions such as a pursuit of an antitrust exemption, conference-wide spending caps, and geographic federation by sport. Finally, I want to share reactions to the biggest solutions the survey respondents evaluated. 2 distinct alternative models that, if adopted, would radically change the current structure and makeup of Division I. I want to start by emphasizing both models retain one of the strongest consensus findings I shared earlier, that the Division I basketball tournament is essential to maintain in its current form. The first organizational restructuring presented in the model is complete separation of the sport of FBS football from the NCAA. In this model, each of the current 130 FBS football programs would do one of two things: either move to a new non-NCAA football-only entity, or keep their football program within the NCAA by moving it to the FCS Football Championship subdivision level. This new FBS football entity outside the NCAA would establish its own membership criteria, fund operations through the college football playoff revenues or other fees, determine revenue distribution for the members of this new entity, and oversee its own regulatory functions, including compliance and athlete safety. All other sports and their championships, including men's and women's basketball, would remain in Division I as they currently do. After reviewing this model, respondents were asked how likely they were to support a new entity that separated FBS football completely from the NCAA. 44% of all respondents are likely to support this model, with 31% indicating they would not support such change. The remaining 25% indicated they were neutral or didn't know what they thought of this substantive reform. But the full story about who supports this concept and who does not can be found in an analysis of the responses by institutional type. The FBS institutions themselves were most unlikely to support a model where they are responsible for football outside the NCAA structure. I want to pause and reemphasize that point. The respondents at schools who sponsor FBS football are most reluctant to take full responsibility for the sport. This is quite a contrast to those respondents who do not sponsor FBS football and find this to be a very desirable approach. The second model presented in the survey is a major organizational change to the NCAA itself: the creation of a fourth division in the NCAA for the Autonomy 5 conferences. These 65 schools would become a completely new division in the NCAA in all sports except basketball. Other schools outside this group may be able to join if they meet the membership criteria for this new division. The new division would establish its own membership criteria with separate championship and eligibility rules concerning the minimum number of sports, scholarship minimums, and amateurism rules. Championships for the new NCAA division could be created for all of the sports in this division, similar to what occurs in Divisions 1, 2, and 3 currently, other than for men's and women's basketball. Much greater detail about both models can be seen in the full report on the Knight Commission website. The data show only 1/3 of respondents support the creation of a separate NCAA division for the Autonomy 5, and nearly half the respondents are opposed to such a move. But as with the first model, evaluating the data by competitive classification tells a much more complete story. In this case, the Autonomy 5 respondents found this to be their preferred approach to organizing college sports. Those outside this group were much less likely to support a fourth NCAA division. Clearly, there are divergent opinions about which of these two models is preferable. In order to better understand the benefits of these two models, we asked respondents to evaluate each model on 3 criteria: whether the model would solve some of the problems in Division I, whether the model would be fair and reasonable to their institution, and whether the model would lead to financial savings. The data indicate there is greater confidence that separating FBS football from the NCAA will solve the problems of Division I, be fair and reasonable, and achieve financial savings. A fourth NCAA division for the Autonomy 5 shows markedly less belief that such an approach would solve the problems we've outlined throughout this study, be fair and reasonable, or achieve financial savings. Clearly, we've covered a lot in a short period of time. I want to turn the presentation over to Knight Commission member Kendall Spencer, who will summarize the key takeaways from the data. Kendall has extensive experience with NCAA governance, serving as the first college athlete on the NCAA Board of Directors in 2013, when the board's composition was changed to include the chair of the NCAA's Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Kendall was a track and field athlete at the University of New Mexico, where he became an NCAA champion in the long jump, and he recently graduated from Georgetown Law School in May. Kendall?
Thank you so much, Michael. Now, before we highlight the key takeaways from the survey, I want to emphasize my strong appreciation for the experience that I had as a track and field student athlete at the University of New Mexico. The Knight Commission's work seeks to improve college athletics and ensure that it has a more stable future moving forward. I'm especially concerned about the opportunities for future student athletes in sports like mine that are not revenue-generating sports, but play just as important of a role in allowing educational and leadership development opportunities through sport. Now to the survey highlights. As you heard, the vast majority of campus and conference leaders surveyed expressed overwhelming support for change in both NCAA Division I governance and its competitive structure. Those leaders also strongly believe that now is the time for action. Nearly 8 in 10 favor big solutions over incremental change. Only 1/3 are satisfied with the current model of Division I governance. And there was a consensus across a range of issues. The first is that there needs to be a board-level appointment strictly to advocate for college athlete health and safety concerns. Next was that there was a significant dissatisfaction with the college football playoff and NCAA revenue distributions and support for change. There's also strong support for sweeping actions to reduce athletics costs through measures such as conference-level spending caps on sports budgets, or even through seeking an antitrust exemption to control costs. Now, with regard to the current organization of Division I and potential models for reorganizations, the survey found overwhelming support to keep the current Division I basketball tournament structure. It also found an openness to different competitive structures within the current model, like more single sport federations instead of sports aligned in the same multi-sport conference. And finally, with regard to major reorganization models tested, the idea of completely separating FBS football from the NCAA has greater support than a fourth NCAA division, as it was viewed as more likely to address the problems in Division I. Now, this concludes our formal presentation. Fellow commission members Nancy Zimpher, Shanteona Keys, and I, along with Knight Commission CEO Amy Perko, consultants Jeff Orleans and Michael Cross, will be available to answer questions. Mark Schugel with Schugel Research is also available. And again, the entire research report, as well as a press release summarizing the highlights and the slides presented in this presentation, will be accessible on knightcommission.org. If you have a question, please click on the Q&A icon on your control panel. Please identify your affiliation and also identify the presenter to whom the question is directed. I'll turn it over to Jenny Trezano to moderate our questions.
Thanks, Kendall. I'd like to start with a question to Nancy. Nancy, having served as a university president, how do you think college presidents will respond to these results, and what do you see as potential obstacles for change?
Well, thanks, Jenny. I think we all know that university presidents and leaders of institutions see that we need a fix here, that things are out of control, and in terms of both governance and structural changes. What presidents now know is that they are not alone, that there is significant concurrence amongst respondents, not just presidents, but other athletic leaders in our higher education context, that change needs to be made. We all are very conscious too of the impact of COVID-19 on our institutional budgets and some of the constraints to financing going forward. So given that there's strong support for change, I think our big challenge is what change? What can we get agreement on that would solve some of these problems? And this is what I think the survey has contributed today.
Thanks. Sam Perelman, who is an assistant AD at UNC Charlotte, asked, it seems to him that some of the initial slides, that much of the survey was completed by administrators. And he's wondering if there's been some thought to, as to whether the results would be more helpful or change some future recommendations if there was a higher percentage of current or even former student athlete respondents from a various group of levels in sports.
It sounds like it might be for me.
Yeah, Mark, if you could take
Okay.
that start.
Sure, yeah. Well, we talked, of course, about different ways to include representation. We talked about former student athletes. We talked about former commissioners, former athletic directors. We decided that we wanted to do a snapshot in time of what leadership looks like now, because so much has changed in the Division I sports world over the years. So we're trying to present the current picture, the current views of campus and sports leadership by limiting it to current participants in the categories that we mentioned.
Dennis,
Let me also jump in.
Go on, Amy. Yep.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that. Obviously, we did also poll the current members of the National Student Athlete Advisory Committee, and Kendall may want to jump in with his experience of I know some work he helped lead when he chaired that committee in terms of research of current athletes, but certainly you know, opportunities to learn more from a broader representation of athletes is something that's a good idea. But going back to the purpose of this study really was to focus on the leadership views of these issues.
Yeah, Amy, I think you're absolutely right, Sam. In regards to your question, again, like what Mark was saying, this was really to serve as sort of a snapshot. I think what the research is going to point to, in short, is yes, it will give us additional information, but really what we were trying to do was get a general sense for some of these high level questions as they pertain to some of the decision makers. And in terms of getting the snapshot, we felt that being able to survey the National Student Athlete Advisory Committee would at least provide us with that snapshot of that group. Now, maybe in the future, we might decide to put together a larger survey that would be geared towards student athletes, but that of course would be a future endeavor that would require additional efforts.
Good, thank you. Dennis Dodd is asking, what does the FBS and P5 restructuring numbers mean to you all? Is it workable that a P5 division could operate with its own amateurism rules?
I'll jump in first, and then if the others want to follow. It's interesting that, with regard to that specific question, we did ask, whether there should be different rules for football and basketball players across academics, amateurism, and things like long-term benefits. And you saw that those were some of the highest responses in terms of commonality across all competitive classifications, and strong response overall that they all believe that they should be treated similarly. Obviously, with regard to the different competitive structures that were tested and breaking out a fourth division for just the Autonomy 5 conferences, that and the other model, obviously the support differed depending on competitive classification. So there are obviously some issues that need to be discussed in greater length as it relates to the differences or dissatisfaction that those outside the A5 have with that idea of a fourth division, and then similarly with the other alternative model of breaking out FBS football. More needs to be learned about what the dissatisfaction is among the FBS institutions with that type of idea. Michael, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts to add.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'd share a couple thoughts. The idea that how would it be handled in a separate division for the Autonomy 5, or what does it look like if football breaks away? The takeaway that I see there first and foremost is there's really strong views across the leadership that they want students to be students. They want students to be treated in ways that care for their health and welfare. And separations don't necessarily mean that those things have to disappear. I think they can very much stay part of whatever new association or new group might be created. And in fact, I think, the Knight Commission would ultimately say, hey, we should be caring about the education, health, safety, and success of our student athletes, regardless of the athletic organization. So I actually find that to be a positive, that there's a care about the values, care about the types of things that higher education should be about, which is the students and student athletes and their experience beyond simply competing in the sports that they're participating in.
Richard Erickson asked, probably for Nancy or Amy, because the Knight Commission is open to reform and support to improve college athletics, what should happen to non-revenue sports struggling to stay viable, like men's gymnastics?
I'll jump in first, and then Nancy, if you have some thoughts, and Kendall, you might even have some thoughts as well, being a former track and field athlete, and we know that a couple of schools have recently dropped at least men's indoor track and field. The commission, again, we exist because we believe in this model that provides leadership and educational opportunities through sport. And we would like to see a model that's healthy and financially healthy and strong, and able to continue to provide a broad base, wide range of those kinds of opportunities, not just in the sports that are revenue generating sports or spectator sports. And in fact, in our session 2, we offered a couple of ideas that we'll continue to think about, and hopefully other leaders will think about ways to change revenue distribution so that, in fact, there are greater incentives to provide a broader range of opportunities, because those the incentive structures just aren't there as they are with other types of incentives. And so that's an action that NCAA leaders could take if they want to help try to provide incentives to stem the sports being cut across the board. So I don't know, Kendall, Nancy, do you have other thoughts?
Well, we were very concerned initially when the immediate effects of COVID and budget reductions and not playing March Madness was leading to cutting sports. We think that athletics is a huge opportunity vendor for our campuses. Many of our campuses recruit through the opportunity to play a sport that attracts students to a campus. And I think we want to protect that at all costs and keep opportunity as one of our highest priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I really couldn't agree more. I think something that's really been resonating with me that Amy mentioned earlier was, having and creating a model that creates incentives beyond just revenue generation, right? Something that I really think about often is this idea of creating value in ways where your non-revenue generating sports really can become more sustainable. Because what I've seen is that it's not just enough to sponsor a sport on campus. We want that sport to stay. And so really what we're looking at is an issue of sustainability and creating a model that allows for some of these non-revenue generating sports to get on campus, to stay on campus, and then to continue producing outstanding student athletes and outstanding members of the community.
Danny, did you have one more? Michael might have wanted to say something about that as well.
Yeah, I want to jump in there quickly. Thanks, Amy. The point I would add is, in addition to all the comments that were made, is the survey data does look at the question of single sport Division I opportunities as well as federation for individual sports. And I think those are two potential techniques that will require some creativity, require some flexibility within the Division I and other divisional memberships that would allow sports that are tenuous as it relates to the number of teams being sponsored nationally to try and identify ways to have a critical mass where you can have meaningful competition that is cost effective and bring together and help identify ways to solve some of the problems that some very low sponsorship number sports are facing right now. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen there, but those two questions were purposely asked, and I think give some insight about the openness, the idea that there are ways to help support some of those sports with lower sponsorship numbers.
Alice Prince, who's with Prince Barnes and Thornburg Athletics, is asking whether the commission has explored what level of federal support there would be for an antitrust exemption. I think a number of you could take this on. Nancy, you want to start?
Well, I think we're fully aware that there are conversations at the congressional level. There's a lot of interest. There's been a lot of interest at several state policymaking bodies. So we do want to stay in touch, and I think it's fair to say that we've had engagement with key congressional leaders that Amy might want to comment on.
Yeah, I would just add, as Michael outlined in the survey, that was one of the strongest areas of support across the board, and in fact had the highest levels of support among the A5 respondents. And you know, this issue of an antitrust exemption to reduce athletic cost, and that's the specific question that was asked. Obviously, there's work going on now to get federal legislation around name, image, likeness rules. But what's really changed over the past several years is in the past, university presidents have not been as willing to ask Congress for help in the management of college sports. And that we've seen, you know, in fact, a tipping point, a real shift. So I think if university presidents can provide the leadership for what some type of limited antitrust exemption might look like and have consensus around that issue, that's really the key moving forward.
Travis Smith from Higher Ed Athletics is asking whether there's any concern a model of new Division I structure will create a rush of either conference realignment or divisional transitions during a pandemic or pandemic recovery period where higher ed is struggling financially. Nancy, why don't you start with that and then others can weigh in.
Well, one of the things that was pointed out in the survey is the difference of opinion on whether or not certain campuses in certain conference divisions can keep up with high finance conferences, particularly to some degree. It was reported in the Power 5 and certainly in the G5 that institutions are having trouble keeping up. And I think the guardrails are coming off. We can't keep this disproportionate distribution of financial engagement when so many are challenged, now even more than ever with the high cost of athletics in competition. So I think there's going to be a great deal of interest in where does my institution best fit in this environment. And we should be, I think, receptive to, as university presidents and our campuses, to taking this moment to ask some really hard questions about the balance of investment, particularly in football and men's basketball, in an effort to keep all other sports going, and whether or not we can afford to be out of line in those two sports. So this is a big opportunity for us. This is a moment, people have said repeatedly, don't let this moment pass. And I hope that campuses and conferences will open themselves to some new arrangements that solve some of these heavy financial challenges.
Kendall, Karen Weaver has a question for you. From an athlete's perspective, how can we get to sustainability? Should the number of D1 sports required for membership be moved higher to encourage more opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, Karen, great question. You know, I think if we take the overall idea of reform and look at it in terms of steps, right? Step one is really figuring out, okay, what do people want, right? What type of model are we looking at? What are some of the needs that, you know, that need to be addressed? Then step two would naturally be, what does that look like? right? What does it look like for the educational values of student athletes across divisions? What does it look like for non-revenue sports? What does it look like for the overall competitive structure? And more importantly, really, what does that look like in terms of the daily lives of student athletes? I think right now we're still in phase one, which is, again, putting together this wide-reaching survey that really is helpful in providing that first snapshot of, okay, what are people looking for? I think moving forward, we have to look at how do we do it, right? What does that actually look like? And when I think of sustainability, I think of something that Nancy said earlier, which is really looking at guardrails, right? How do we create strong boundaries that allow this overly competitive structure to not get out of hand so much that it pushes some of these sports and some of these institutions to make decisions that negatively impact student athletes across a wide range of sports.
One quick point on that question. I'll just direct Karen Weaver to Mark Shugel's full report, because some questions about membership levels of maximum or minimum sports for Division I membership. That was a question asked, and so further detail about how the respondents responded across the board can be found in the full report to that question.
I think we only have time for one or two last questions, but there's one from John Robinson. Are there any discussions about Title IX reform, great intentions with some negative consequences on male non-revenue sports? I'm wondering if Shanteona, if you'd be willing to take a try at that one for us. And you have to unmute.
Sorry about that. In terms of Title IX implications, I imagine I didn't work closely with this group on specific details of Title IX, so I'll definitely pass it to Nancy once I'm finished. But to Kendall's point, we're trying to create a healthy ecosystem at the end of the day, and so those things would be factored in to the decisions and the thoughts that this committee came forth with. So I'm sure that was discussed, but I'll pass it to Nancy for further elaboration for sure.
Well, I think one of the things we'd want our audience to know is that we have an equity task force that was formed immediate response to Black Lives Matter and the all of equity and racial justice, and Title IX is always going to be a part of that conversation. And we're very hopeful that some specific recommendations will come from that task force. And frankly, I think we all hope that they will align with our recommendations so that we keep Title IX and equity and racial justice at the forefront. That's what it really means to provide for the education, health, safety, and success of our student athletes.
Nancy, if we could take one last question directed at you. What is the likelihood of any of these changes happening soon?
Well, I think, thank you for that question. Once the Knight Commission, which has a history of making recommendations, sets its shoulder to the wheel, and I think works in partnership with the division, the conferences, the NCAA, that it's up to us to make these changes. None of us can do it alone. This is a spirit of collaboration that I think these times call for. And I would have to say we're optimistic that this moment will allow us to make these significant changes. But you know what? We have to do it ourselves. We have to do it together. And that's what leadership is all about. And I know our presidents and campus leaders will join us in this work.
That's a great way to end on the Q&A section. I'm now going to turn it over to our commissioner, Knight Commissioner Shanteona Keys. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. As a former college athlete like Kendall, I share an appreciation for the experience and the leadership development opportunities that college sports have provided for me. Over the past several months, I've served as the co-vice chair of the Commission's Racial Equity Task Force alongside Lynn Elmore and Jacques McClendon. The passionate discussions we've had with leaders in the field to influence positive change has been incredible, and we look forward to continued collaboration. As you've heard, the Knight Commission's Transforming the D-I Model series seeks to lead transformational change to prioritize the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. Hopefully you've seen the other two sessions. breaking down college sports finances, and an analysis of the D1 revenue distribution inequities. If you've missed them, the videos and related materials are available on our website, knightcommission.org. Our final session in this series will be the capstone to the previous 3 public forums. In session 4, scheduled for November 19th, the Knight Commission will provide recommendations for change to the current D1 model. You can register for the forum at knightcommission.org or check your email boxes for future registration instructions. Thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you again on November 19th.